So I think I might either fire him or I mean, it was like, yeah, so I should have
yeah, very fire corona. Did you see how you did on the podcast?
I know.
I got a 92%, which I don't know. I thought it was kind of.
You got the word phone?
I don't remember.
The really hard one about the pay phone.
Oh yeah, because I like practiced that one for some reason. I did not really know it. I don't remember why. But I practiced that one with the perimeter shit, which is ridiculous.
How was your weekend, Jose? Good?
That was absent Friday. Passed back the extra credit.
If it's back, it should be. Usually I'll pass it back over the day of the exam. Or the examination. You can always take whatever you want out of there if you want.
Alright.
So in the reading,
You have a little, you don't have a little. Some other colleges are probably like you.
it talks about
And the fine splits?
it's the anti-inflammatory. But it's one that and they were using it on cattle. Something like that. Why would they be using anti-inflammatory?
Maybe you sort of slaughter. Walk through them.
Did you ever watch
Sure was not your body-part or antibiotic.
KYD? Yeah, that was. It was Caillou and then Jack. Caillou was like the
Veterinary care for animals has always been like.
Doesn't know what Caillou is. So I know like they read like that's like A songs for my life. I'm wondering why they would Caillou. Like an anti-Caillou.
I mean, like you're not worried about the animal's pain.
You good?
So I would think there has to be a functional benefit. Like
Brandy?
you know, you're supposed to take anti-inflammatories prophylactically so that you can use them to protect yourself from injuries, having tight joints.
Okay, my mom
So
was
maybe the secret is for either free-range cattle or contained cattle, but
how late?
the alternative is too harmful for them because they get burnt with their
Yes,
I don't know, man.
of course I did.
I would probably just Google this. This is called Google.
I do how do you know her? Yeah. How do you know Nicole?
Yes, but I'm signed up. So
I don't know how it happened. I caught my left and I hit my directly.
Maybe I don't know.
I don't know if it's fractured.
I know a lot of people. I went to school with Nicole. At
I
summer.
thought it's by the back, but it doesn't hurt as much.
Yeah, it makes me so mad that I can't see these.
I'm pretty sure you know if it was fractured.
Cool. I told my mom I got it.
How is your, I mean,
You were so bad.
don't panic.
I got neck tree and I have just like mild tendonitis.
Okay. There's like a 1 in a trillion chance that one of those injuries
it's happened to me, when you get a break, the break will heal. But on the edge of the break, if it's close to where there's a skin in the bone already, like where a nerve goes through the bone or something, then sometimes as all that calcium carbonate is repairing the fracture, it'll spill out into other parts of the bone. So the problem I have is I have bone where I'm not supposed to because of the break. Yeah, so I shattered it lengthways like this. It got bent back, and that like snapped like this piece went. But then they just reset it. I had to wear a soft cast for 2 months. But was fine, didn't hurt. You know, I fell on it when I had a cast, no problem. I fell on it after the cast, no problem. Forgot about it. And as I've gotten older, I've developed like a really aching spot. And sometimes, if I've been using my hand a lot, I do a lot of carpentry. I'll do it.
Well, Kinley, how are you today?
You can like.
Let's do today. I'm so bad.
That runs from here down.
The USD
That tendon has to go under.
and that are on the same day, and they're both at the same place.
Are you not growing over slowly?
That is
So
my
it's getting
mom.
like narrowed from underneath.
My friend.
I was when I was in the what do they call it? The doctors that specialize in yeah, so she was saying that she did something that violinists do and piano players do, where they reasonably can't go through all the things optimized by the nuclear system, and you can get them cut so that you have massive variation. So
I've heard violins and cellos.
and piano players and that as well. She was saying like I'm not recommending it right now, but as you get older, you are more flexible, more handy, have more reach.
I've heard
You can
because we're holding the bow.
yeah.
I want to throw up now. Dude, I got no parts to spare. You can't take anything off me. God made me perfect.
So, but I've seen. I went back and watched the video, and there's someone like raising their hands, enabling, and then raising it. You have nothing coming back. It's just like doing that with your wrist. It's like they couldn't have doing that with your wrist with your fingers.
Yeah. Broke my toe, so that was painful. Got x-rayed.
I've never broken a bone I know of.
Oh, homegirl Mary is so she's not there.
Who was it? Tracy, did I tell you that you chose an animal someone already chose?
Yeah, and I took a picture of the thing, and I could not find one that someone hasn't.
Above you.
Yeah.
It's him.
What?
What animal do you have?
Fight to the death.
What? Green crab? Green crab?
The one that lives gets
He has it.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
I can't find another one. I'm still looking.
keep trying.
Put my finger again.
Really?
I went to
There's no excuse for that then.
I'm just like popping out a little bit.
Wow.
These are expired. Sorry, I'm going to give you one guy and my phone. Like you can't have one.
on the surface, maybe then once you got down to the
No, I just don't want some weird chemical reaction to happen to you and have to be like druggy.
So I don't have to go next time.
We're caring about me.
No more, it's always a carry on myself.
Students,
Unless you have a zero.
you know why you're the luckiest class in the world? Because I wasted my homework stamping period talking to kids, and then I found out that Mary's not coming, so I'll stamp. She or I will stamp your homework tomorrow. Take out your reading packet. Sorry, your field trip packet that you just grabbed in the back, though. We got to talk about that.
I'm so bad. How would you describe FB photos? Perfect. We don't really have views.
Okay. We're a little bit behind. I got to motivate. Your field trip packet has 3 separate sheets of paper. All 3 are due this Wednesday, day after tomorrow. You've got 2 days. I want you to please look at all the papers in order with me. The first paper has a 1 and 2 with little arrows drawn on the left side. The front is in Spanish, the back is in English. Whichever language your parents prefer, they have to fill out number 1 and number 2. You'll notice that it's 1 and 2 on both sides. You only do it once in your language of choice. Either Spanish on one side or English on the other side. Then please look at the second piece of paper. It has a 3 on top of the arrow. I'm sure you're familiar with these forms, but you'll have to put your name on it. If you don't have your name on it, we won't be able to excuse you on the day of the trip. So the first paper is to get you insurance coverage from the district. The second paper is to get you excused from your absence. Make sure it has your name and all the teacher signatures. And the third paper, where it says number 4 done with a smiley face, that one is to get you onto the airport property, which I'm sure you know is very highly regulated because of the whole 9/11 thing. So you'll have to bring all 3 papers by Wednesday. It's not arbitrary. I didn't pick it out of a hat, but that's a real deadline. Remember that your field trip is free, periods 1 through 5. You got to go to 0 and or 6, unless you work that out on some other way. You'll need food, water, comfortable shoes, and sun protection. Optional is a backpack to carry all of that, layers, and swimming stuff. It's going to be off the hook. I really hope you can go. Are there any questions about the field trip? Yeah.
Are there dedicated places we'd be actually swimming? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely my hope. I'm not a lifeguard, and there's no lifeguard on duty out there. So you're kind of just freestyle swimming with a teacher nearby. The only reason I can even allow you to swim is a lot of my students are lifeguards. Yeah.
On number 3, versus people that have
Number 3, what?
on number
Pupil. Yes, you are the student.
3. And then on number 4, is that us signing or
No, number 4 is an adult. Okay, take out your notes from the PowerPoint on Friday. Let me know where we left off, please. So where did we leave off? What's the last time that we looked at? Did we do this? You saw this? Spongy, softwoods, fast growing. They grow vertically to catch all the sunlight because it comes at a shallow angle because it's near the poles. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
Okay. Hand up. Oh, thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you. Okay, so look. If you take the entire planet, slice it at the equator,
Unreal.
this is 90 degrees, 60 degrees, 30 degrees north. Then there would be 30 degrees south, 60 degrees south, and somewhere down there would be 90 degrees south. These are called the tropics, polar, and temperate zones. In the polar, we had two. We had tundra, and we had boreal forest, aka taiga. Now we're getting into the temperate zone. And remember that temperate is outside of that polar circulation. Temperate doesn't have as much extreme seasonality. Temperate is kind of in between. Like, look what happens when I show you 30 and 60. 60 is right, let's see. 60 is right here. That's 60. And that's 30. So look what we've got between 30 and 60. All the people. So most of Canada, the United States, parts of northern Mexico, northern Africa, the Mediterranean, most of Europe, most of the Middle East, much of the Asian Orient, the Far East, much of China, Japan. If you look in the south, 30 to 60 includes the capitals of Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, much of southern South America, Australia, the Pacific Islands. 30 to 60 is where all the people are. It's like the heart of humanity. And so we're going to leave the poles and start with the temperate stuff. It's this minty greenish, like sage kind of color. There it is, that minty greenish sage kind of color. You'll notice that there's a big old chunk in the northeastern coast of the United States, and there's also a big old chunk in Europe. Now, you guys remember, right, that a frog from Hawaii would do really well in Australia if it finds similar climate, right? The cane toad kicked ass in Australia because it was used to the seasons, it was used to the rainfall, it was used to the heat, it was used to the bugs. You know, basically just stayed in its biome, but without its ecosystem, without its competitors and its predators. Now think about the pilgrims. They were pretty well prepared for the United States because they came out of the same biome. They could use the same shoes and the same jacket and the same farming techniques and the same lumber techniques and the same house construction styles If you can keep a pig alive in York, you can probably keep a pig alive in New York. And so I know it was really difficult and everything. But all things considered, one big bonus is that the Europeans stayed in their biome. You know, I think things would have been really different if they washed up on like the coast of South Africa or in New Zealand. Because, you know, in different climate, that's just another thing to deal with. You have to figure out, well, you know, what kind of clothes do we give the baby in spring? And like, how do we build a house that's going to handle all this extra snow load? But the Euros, when they came to the U.S., they were just like redoing what they did back home. I feel like that part doesn't really get told in history. When you guys talk about history, we don't really talk about that environmental variable question. And you know these places because they're nice places to live. You know the Ivy Leagues? Like you want to go to an Ivy League college because it's in like a really nice place to live. Think about what the weather is like. They're seasons. They are real seasons. But they're not extreme. They're not ridiculous. In the taiga, during the winter, it is like really, really winter. Like unless you lose a bet and you happen to be Siberian, people don't live there. I mean, taiga is just not a friendly environment for humans at all. That winter is brutal. You know, imagine 3 months where the temperature never gets within 10 degrees of freezing. Like, that's pretty gnarly. 3 months at 10 below. Here, it's not that bad. Here you've got a spring and a fall and a summer, and yes, there's a winter. But you know, it's 3 months of winter. And really, the dead center of winter is maybe 2 months. So like 8 weeks of snow on the ground. That's cold and everything, but 8 weeks for a tree is kind of like, 8 weeks. The rest of the year is pretty sweet. So there's just those couple of months you got to put up with. Just those couple of months. Now remember, at the poles, trees have to grow like this. Because when the sun's out, it's on the side. So they got to grow up to grab it. But now that we've left the poles and we're in the temperate part of the earth, now the sun's overhead when the sun is out. So these trees will go up and out. Like they're ready to be tickled. They get months and months and months of growing. There's a little bit of rain in the spring and a little bit of rain in the fall and a little bit of rain in the summer. But it's not like a swamp where they're just wallowing in water. They make big old leaves, like open hands, to catch all that sun. And then in the winter, when those leaves are kind of a liability and it's going to be too cold to do much, they just say, you know what? Bale the leaves. They pull out everything useful so that the leaf shows its true color. You guys know that chlorophyll is a pigment that turns red leaves to look green? But chlorophyll is not native to leaves, and leaves are not naturally green without the chlorophyll. As soon as the plant says, wait a minute, I want to take that back, they put the chlorophyll back into their woods. They redigest it, and they keep it on the inside. So the leaves are orangey red, and then they fall, which is why the season is called fall. Everybody knew that, right? That fall is fall because the leaves fall. So the forest takes a little break. Look at the floor of that forest. There's just layers of dry leaves. Now that's actually really helpful to the tree. It's part of the design. Remember, by dropping the leaves, they create like thousands of little air pockets. You guys know what thousands of little air pockets are good for? Insulation, like the way that a wetsuit works. So the tree, I mean, by dropping its leaves, makes a little insulated pocket of moist, warmer soil to protect the soil ecology down there, keep all those nutrients cycling, keep all those bugs doing their bug thing. The tree puts a blanket onto its roots and then just waits out the winter. As soon as the rain starts to come and the days are getting longer, the tree will use all of its stored energy to make a new round of leaves, and we call it spring, and then the trees get all green and everybody's happy. Like that. I don't know about you, but when I see that picture, I get an immediate good feeling. Like, I want to take a hammock wherever that is, and I'll be back in 4 hours. Like, something about this feels good to me. I think that this is like a native goal for humans. Like, if you leave all the humans alone and they just wander around, they'll all end up there. Sure of it. I mean, look at that. You've got like some sun, but not too much. And I can just hear those leaves rustling right now. I can feel like a cool breeze picking up that forest floor air, just tumbling the leaves onto my foot. That's nice. These trees will grow for months and months and months. This is the only downtime. Remember, because they grow out, they need really strong lumber. They don't grow up perfectly straight. They grow out with lots of elbows and knuckles. So they need really, really strong lumber. This is hardwood. Very heavily mineralized, very dense wood. They don't need to store water in their wood. The wood is structural, not for water retention. So these are hard, mineralized trees, not softwoods. This is what you make guitars out of, fancy furniture, nice chairs, jewelry boxes. You can't build houses with these types of trees. Finally, there's almost none of this left. Because by the time we started to conserve land, we had already been living in this biome for hundreds of years. Keep in mind, when the concept of public land conservation came up, this was already used up. Especially in the United States. I mean, do you guys all know American history well enough to realize that, like, this was the first white Americans right here? And we had spread all out here pretty much corner to corner before there was any concept of conservation. In the West, we could conserve giant pieces of the map. Because, you know, they were still in big ranches owned by 3 or 4 people. You say, thank you for the gift, thank you for the gift, I'd like to buy your land, I'm going to take your land, and hooray, we made Yosemite. But if you wanted to make something the size of Yosemite in upstate New York, you had to purchase, what, 3,000 private ranches? Huge difference. Huge difference. This was all used up before the age of conservation. Anybody want to talk more about this, deciduous forest? If you go from the deciduous forest and walk out to where the jet stream comes in off the ocean, you've got temperate rainforest. Temperate rainforest is temperate forest where the rain is extreme. And when I say rainforest, I really mean rainy rainforest, rainy. Anybody know your closest rainforest to Santa Barbara, California? Not quite, but it's similar in stature. your closest rainforest is northern Oregon, southern Washington. It's called the Hoh rainforest. And yes, I said it. And they get something like 300 plus inches of rain per year, which is a pretty wet year in the heart of the Amazon. The Hoh rainforest is one of the rainiest places on the planet. And that's because of this little thing called the jet stream. I'll explain all this later in the year, but you might as well know about it now. There's a big current that spins in a circle in the northern Pacific, like this. And as it spins around the tropics, it picks up steam from all that water evaporating because it's the tropics, so it's hot, right? So water vapor, water vapor, water vapor, water vapor, water vapor, water vapor. And then in this temperature change, right here, that big current of moist air gets sucked onto land. That's called a jet stream. High altitude wind coming off the Pacific Ocean that carries a lot of water vapor. That makes most of the rainfall for farm country, for example. But have you heard that like Portland and Seattle and stuff are always getting hit by rain? Anybody here have a student friend in Humboldt University, Arcata, something like that? Oh, your sister's at the University of Washington, yeah? Humboldt State?
Seattle Pacific.
Great. All three of them complain about the constant rain, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they haven't started yet. Give them a minute. Up here, it's just constant rainfall because all of the Pacific's moisture that's evaporated into the air comes onto land right here on that coast. So that's where all of this comes from. That is the Hoh rainforest. They are the middle of the jet stream. And so, right there, Hoh rainforest. More rain than the Amazon, but it's temperate. It's right above the red in our northwest. There's a little bit down here in the coast of Chile, a little bit down here, quite a bit of it in New Zealand, and a little bit on the North Island of Japan. Is that Hokkaido right there? Anybody know? I'm a racist. I don't have to know. I'm in America now. Okay, fine. But we're talking wet, 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 like lush. Except it's not like the tropics where it's hot and sunny all day. It's still temperate. So it's like middle of the road temperatures with seasons, you know. There's still a winter here. Snow's not going to stick because you're on the coastline. You're going to get rained on every day, but it's still cold. So, you know, it's like the growth season in the boreal forest for more months with less snow and more water. So you get all the boreal trees, except they're giant here. This is all the softwoods with extra water. So the world's largest Doug fir is in this forest. The world's largest red cedar in this forest. The world's largest yellow fir in this forest. Technically, redwoods are in a biome that's extremely similar to this forest. These conditions favor the big tall trees, but they don't have the bad weather part of the boreal climate. So those trees would be big anywhere you found them on the planet, but up here they're almost twice the height. I have a friend of mine who is an arborist. For a living, he has to climb up into trees and cut branches and stuff. And on his holidays, he goes up to the Pacific Northwest to climb the tallest example of numerous species. He's been on top of the biggest eucalyptus, which is actually on Santa Cruz Island, by the way. He's been on top of the biggest Douglas fir, the biggest yellow fir, the biggest gray cedar. He's been in one of the top 5 red cedars. He's been in one of the top 5 redwoods.
How tall are those?
Oh, they're really tall. You can Google it, I don't know. But he gets up to like near the very top when you can't climb anymore. And then he'll use a rope to bend the tip of the tree back down, you know, like pull it down to himself so he can touch the top of the tree. He says it's super dodgy because a big old tree, if it's just moving a little bit, when you're standing on top, that means you're getting whipped across like 50 feet. And you're standing on branches like that big, looking down like 350 feet. Kind of hair-raising. He's taking some photographs for me. It'll blow your mind.
He's like strapped into some stuff, right?
Yes. It is considered marginal but redundant protection. So he would probably have like a really painful but hopefully survivable fall.
It's like you'd hit much of the branch come back down.
I don't think he would have much of a long fall, but falling in trees sucks even if it's a short fall.
Yeah.
You fall 6 foot in trees and you can die. So it's difficult to protect all that. And these forests are, as a biome, they're not that interesting. As a biome, it's like a turbocharged boreal forest. Oh yeah. But does anybody know what this is? What kind of owl? Look at the pattern. Spotted owl, the western spotted owl. Now, I have a really interesting story about the history of environmental science and this bird. This is one of those trivia species that everybody has to know. It's like a condor. Critical in the history of the environment. The western spotted owl was discovered to be endangered in the late 1970s. It's a very small owl. They're quiet. And you know a weird thing about them is they just hate noise. You'll never see one within a mile of the freeway. You'll never see one within a mile of a house. You'll never see one within a mile of a city. And here's the final straw. You'll never see one within a mile of a logger. In the 70s and 80s, when the economy was growing pretty well and America was stoked on economic growth, the Pacific Northwest was kind of a cracking economy. They had a lot of action going on because, you know, they have a lot of trees up there. All up here, logging money, logging communities. Basically from right there, Cloverdale, all the way up to Vancouver, British Columbia, it's all lumber country. And frankly, I feel really bad for the loggers. As far as I'm concerned, if you're working for your money, you're cool with me. And loggers are, that's physical labor, you know. I mean, they're actually sweating for their money, so super cool with me. But obviously, that logging activity was causing the endangerment of these owls. And, you know, these owls are just the tip of the iceberg. If the owls are leaving, you can assume much of the rest of the ecosystem is also in trouble. These were the indicator species, the ones that told us we had a problem. But imagine what that means for a logger. You got like a kid in college or your wife's on chemo and you lose your job. And you look around your neighborhood and half of your neighbors on your block have left. They shut down your neighborhood school because there's no families left in town. Your roommate gets fired as the nurse because the hospital's cutting back because there's no more patients because everybody's leaving town. It's really depressing and really tragic what happens when an economy collapses. Especially if you have a whole community that's just held up by one economy. This is like the otters and the urchin fishery in Santa Barbara, you know, a natural opposition that's really not about the animal. In the Pacific Northwest, when we started to protect the owl, we ended up shutting down like hundreds of square miles of logging, which wiped out whole communities. Humboldt State University in Arcata, that's where Pacific Lumber Company is, PLC. That's one of the world's largest lumber firms. And they went from being like one of the top 5 businesses in the United States to being sold off for parts in something like 2 years. I mean, imagine like wiping out Ford and GM, in a period of 2 years. Just erasing an industry. Really, really tragic. And it was sort of like an us versus them thing. All the environmentalists painted the loggers as environmental criminals that wanted everything to die. And then all the loggers painted environmentalists as reckless liberals that hated their communities. And there were like armed fights and like it got really, really, really ugly. By the way, those of you that are into drugs, this is sort of like one of the reasons that the marijuana economy took off in NorCal. You might be surprised to know that the marijuana economy has only been for young people for the last couple of years. In the 80s and the 90s, all the growers were old-timers, loggers and farmers that just couldn't pay their bills by their traditional methods, and so they were growing stuff that most of them, like, this isn't like wannabe white Rastafarians that like to burn. These were like desperate old people that had to put their kids through college or pay the mortgage. It's pretty amazing, actually, because now that there's a whole bunch of young people trying to get rich in the marijuana economy, it's causing a lot of conflict up in the Northwest, where there's like the old school drug business and the new school drug business, and those are 2 really different cultures.
What about like the conflation with the Mexican drug cultures?
You see a lot of that in California, but the international cartels are mostly based. They mostly grow north of the border in illegal mega grows. And those usually end in central California. They do a lot of that in national forests and national parks. And so like I know one of the rangers in Yosemite whose job it is to exterminate illegal grows in the park. And that's his whole full-time job. Most of those guys kind of end there. And so the Pacific Northwest green economy is mostly in conflict with Asian importers, I think, and then with itself because of the old-timers and new-timers. Remember, this is lumber country, so our major human interaction with this biome is just to get the wood out. Here's an interesting detail. Look at the estimates of how much is intact. Maybe 33 or maybe 3? That's a big difference, right? That's like saying you're going to get paid somewhere between $100,000 and 10 grand this year. A factor of 10 is kind of a lot of play. The reason those numbers are so different is there's a lot of old growth that's still healthy old growth, but it's already been cleared for logging and it's in private ownership. Like one of the biggest holders of old growth forest is Cox. Like the Cox family, like Cox Communication, the cable people here in Santa Barbara, or Cox Cable. That family is one of the biggest owners of intact Pacific Northwest temperate rainforests. But all their land is privately held and already approved for logging. So there's a lot that's intact today, but that doesn't mean it's in preservation. It's just scheduled to be logged in the next decade or 2. So the big number of intact won't stay intact. The 3%, that's the stuff that's explicitly protected from logging. Okay. Temperate woodland is basically one of those little sub-biomes that doesn't have to be a biome because it doesn't really exist. It is the driest part of woodland forest. So dry that hardwoods cannot live. There's just a season of water here. So in temperate woodland, you actually get conifers like you would up north. But they're dwarf conifers that grow slowly. So they're hard conifers, which is basically the opposite of everything I've told you so far. Those pine trees are ancient, and they're like that big around. Because they grow like that much in 1 year. They barely grow at all. Just barely. They just squeeze out a little bit of growth every year. Because there's not a lot of moisture. It's too arid for those big trees with the big leaves. They just dry out. They can't keep those leaves going. Not enough rain in summer, spring, and fall. So they're conifers that are good at holding on to their water. But instead of growing for 9 months like they do in Siberia, they grow a little tiny bit every year. There's very little to say about this. It's not ecologically very interesting. In terms of ecology, it's just the dry part of the temperate forest, and that's all you got to know. But as far as human interests are concerned, this is definitely lumber country. Because hard conifers, especially in the American South where you're so far from the big trees, that's pretty handy. Anybody ever been to Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi? If you go to like a fancy mansion there, I'll bet you money that the floors are yellow pine, which is a tree that grows in Florida. It's that pine tree I showed you, which is like a pine, long and straight. But unlike pine trees, it's not soft, foamy wood. It's like dense, hard wood. It's close to the hardness of oak, but it's a pine tree. Okay, this is where you live. This is your biome. I can show you on a map. There's 5 regions just like ours on Earth. Please look up. They are all, and this is worth knowing, 35 degrees, either north or south, on the western coast of the continent. Because that's where the weather is. Please look up. That red chunk at 35, it's a big one. This is the biggest on the planet because it has this little chunk of ocean, so that's all coastline. Does that make sense? The Mediterranean Ocean just creates a lot of coastline along 35, right? Ours at 35 with the Pacific, Chile's at 35 with the South Pacific, South Africa at 35 in the Atlantic, and Australia at 35 with the Indian Ocean. You notice that they're at 35 degrees, exactly, and you'll notice that they're on the west coast. You all live here. Some of you have lived here a very long time. How many of you have lived here your whole lives? Who was born in Santa Barbara? Dang. And how many of you plan to leave? That's good. What's the weather like in Santa Barbara? It's nice, mild.
Like the same all the time, almost.
Extremely consistent. Our average temperature month after month after month all the way through the calendar varies by like 9 degrees. What else can you tell me about the weather in Santa Barbara? Not that much rain. And you know another way to say that? Very few rainy days. Like, has anybody here ever worn out their rain boots? Yeah, does anybody have rain boots? Aside from the girls when they were kind of popular with the like patterned rubber boots, like I don't know anybody that has rain boots. A couple of farmers I know. When it rains, how are those storms?
Pretty intense.
We actually have some of the most violent storms on Earth. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't rain like this anywhere else.
Think carefully about this. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. You're probably all thinking about last year, which was like a pretty atypical year. Last year was a really dry winter. And actually the winter before that was pretty dry, and before that you guys were like sperm, so you probably weren't paying attention. But you know, Santa Barbara gets sort of a lot of rainfall. You know, San Marcos Pass is one of the rainiest single weather stations in the United States. My house on West Camino Cielo got 18 inches of rain in one day. 18 inches of rain in one day is that's a lot. Like, there's very few places on this planet where you will ever find 18 inches in one day. Yeah.
Because, like, in contrast to a lot of rainy places, it's like lots of places have frequent light rain, but here it's like massive, infrequent storms.
What he said. Most places on the planet, it rains in summer.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you go to the Mojave on the hottest day of the summer, it's going to rain on you, right? Like, early afternoon, you'll get like a 15 to 20 minute spritzer. Do you guys realize that we have the longest dry spells of any place but the South Pole? No, specifically like Santa Barbara County. Because what we get is our last big storm sometimes in April, sometimes in early May. Then you get May, June, July, August, September, guaranteed dry. October sometimes, kind of depends. And usually you'll have a big storm by November no matter what. So we get on average 6 months between big storms. And of that 6 months, the big 6-month dry spell, it's hottest at the end. August, September, and October are the hottest months in Santa Barbara. I mean, think about what that does to the plants. After a 3-month drought, we're going to have a 3-month heat wave of drought. You know, cactus from the Chihuahua Desert die in Santa Barbara. Cactus from Death Valley die in Santa Barbara. Because in Death Valley in the Chihuahua Desert, it rains in summer. It's not here. We have extremely long dry spells. When the rain hits, it's going to be big time. But only when the rain hits. So here it is. Like you already said, extremely long dry summer, rare super dumper storms. Remember that our hot periods are more extended dry than a desert. Bear with me. Everything here has to grow when there's water and then lock it in. Yes?
Why doesn't it rain in summer?
Well, I can explain why it doesn't rain in our summers when we get to the atmosphere unit. We live in a strange conflict. Remember I showed you these stripes across the planet? Polar, temperate, tropical. Now, we live right in that wedge. And so coincidentally, in our atmosphere, there are 2 big cycles of dry air above us in the atmosphere. It's very, very rare that you will have moisture in our upper atmosphere to bring rain down. Very rare. Remember how we talked about the shape of the plants? Where am I doing this? Boreal forest, right? Where am I doing this? Temperate deciduous. Now in Santa Barbara, the vegetation does this. Because remember that the wind takes away your water. So our forest is adapted to lock it in. The trees are little runts. Anybody know what chaparro is? Short. It means like a runt. like a grom. Chaparral or chaparral means a remember to look both ways, kids. I'm glad you're okay, Chet. I'm glad you're okay, bro. Okay. Back to me. Chaparral, that means dwarf forest. Because most species that you'll find here in Santa Barbara County have a sister species somewhere else. Like, you guys seen the big valley oaks in Los Olivos? You know, the big old oak trees? Anybody seen Coast Live Oak? They got little bitty leaves. And they go like this. I mean, go walk around our forest. Our forest is a dwarf forest. It's shoulder high. Because of that rainfall issue. When they get rain, they got to soak it up, and they chug, 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 chug. And then they got to lock up. Imagine if you could get a drink and then have to hold it for like 6 months. Like, cactus cannot do that. Let me remind you. This is harder on plant life than living in the desert. You can take any Santa Barbara native, put it in a pot, take it to the Mojave Desert, and it'll be fine in a pot, no problem. Might need a little extra dirt. You got to add a little dirt to it. But you bring plants from the Mojave, put them in Santa Barbara, and they die because this is too long of a dry spell. So look, there's your little grom forest, your runt forest. Looking down at anybody know where this is? No, it's surf spot. Tarantulas, Paul. Look at this forest. Like, when you look at that, you think, oh yeah, forest. And then you go walk there, and it's like, forest. You can look over that entire landscape, and do you realize it looks dusty? Because it's dusty. The ground is dry, the wind will blow, and there's no rainfall to wash our leaves. We have the dustiest forest. Like birds in our ecosystem often have a coating of dust because they knock into leaves and it just blows dust onto them. I mean, there's dust in every forest, of course, but the rain washes it off unless you live here where there ain't no rain for 6 or 7 months in a row. Finally, here's one of the last really unique things about our climate. Because it's so dry, and because there's so little rainfall, if there happens to be like a freak thunderstorm lightning strike in summer, you guys all know what happens, right? When the fire gets started around here in the summertime. Now remember, trees don't need umbrellas because rain is natural. And trees don't need sunblock because sun is natural. And our trees are adapted to fire because fire in this system is unavoidable. Anybody ever been here during a summer lightning storm? Those are kind of cool, right? Usually they'll hit up there. We don't get so much thunder down here. But when one of those lightning storms starts a fire up there, our forest is used to that. Many of our big trees can survive fire. They have really thick bark. The leaves burn off. And then they just take the nutrients back out of the ground and start a new set of leaves. Have you guys noticed how all the places that burned down in the tea fire now have like lush green oak trees in many places? This is what we call a fire renewal community. Meaning that in this part of the world, fire is a rejuvenating element in the ecosystem. It helps get those nutrients out of the wood mass back to the soil. So right after a big fire, you'll see the best wildflowers there is. Because last year's ashes are this year's fertilizer. In our ecosystem, we don't have soil. Have you guys ever noticed that? Like, go try to use your hands to dig a hole when you're walking to take a poop somewhere. Like on a trail, if you got to dig a hole, you can't because it's rock with a little bit of fine sand on top. There's no nutrient load in the ground because remember, there's no water in the ground. So there's no soil ecosystem. There's no decomposers. There's no worms. There's very little stuff in our dirt. So the fire is, in evolutionary terms, taking the place of soil in a normal forest. By the way, anybody know what those are? Golden eagle, a really famous invasive. Santa Barbara County is really well known because of the DDT that killed off the bald eagles on the islands, taken over by a different type of eagle that caused all sorts of problems out there. So a famous example of the silent spring, pollution, extinction, invasive takeover, ecological disasters. The Santa Cruz Island is one of the best studied environmental disasters because of all the invasives and chaos there. Okay, you already saw that one, and there's your numbers. You live in the most endangered habitat on the earth. Remember that this biome only occurs in 5 little patches on the entire planet. And every one of them is a resort community. Every one of them has been used since, like, Roman times. Like, Romans living in Rome are in this climate. So, this is highly dominated, and almost nowhere is this environment still intact. Since there was so little to begin with, and we only have a small percentage of that, you live in the most environmentally special land there is. If you can find intact wilderness near you, count yourselves lucky. You got better chances being dropped out of a plane, of seeing a polar bear hitting a rainforest, than of seeing intact Mediterranean. Bye, children.
So does that mean that in Australia, where there's the same habitat, does it kind of resemble this, like our environment?
Yeah, very much.
So if I want to live in like the same kind of like summer evening, that's where I'd want to go.
That's one place. There's 3 others.
Yeah. Okay.
So Jose, you said you worked
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool because you get to see behind the scenes of the zoo. You end up doing a lot of, like, shit labor, you know, like grunt labor. But I would recommend it just as an experience that's otherwise not very common.